Welcome Shannon Dempster from Queensland Department of Natural Resources.
Thanks very much, Bram. Can everyone hear me okay? That's good. I think Greg did most of my job for me, actually, but I'll give it a go. My name's Shannon Dempster. I'm from the Department of Natural Resources and Mines. I've worked for the department in its various forms for the last 20 years or so. Spent a fair bit of time in the Gulf catchments in the late 90s, but hadn't been back really until the last couple of years. And it was very interesting to me to see just how much or how little certain parts of the catchments had changed. But what we've been doing in the last few years in the Gulf catchments is reviewing the Gulf Water Resource Plan. The Water Resource Plan is a statutory document. It's subordinate legislation to the Water Act, and it defines strategies for allocating and managing the water resources within certain catchments. The Water Resource Plan was first developed in 2007, but Greg mentioned CSIRO's work in the Flinders and Gilbert River Ag resource assessments, and the former government announced that once that assessment had been finalised, that the Gulf Water Resource Plan would be reviewed to consider the findings of that assessment. So that process actually commenced last year when the Flinders and Gilbert River ag resource assessments, when those studies were made public. They did highlight a range of scenarios for water resource development, including in-stream storages, looking at off-stream facilities and small mosaics of farming enterprises with irrigated agriculture. So there are a range of different options. What the department did look at is the optimum options provided within those assessments. So that for the Gilbert River meant a large storage on the Gilbert River in Greenhills Dam, and another one called Dagworth Dam site, obviously, in the Etheridge. So those two dam sites were considered in our initial assessments when we were looking at reviewing the Water Resource Plan. The Water Resource Plan prior to this review identified 15,000 megalitres of water to be allocated in the Gilbert River catchment. A process was run in 2011-2012 with allocations made to at least 3 landholders in the Gilbert River system for that 15,000 megalitres. In fact, it fell a little bit short, so 14,220 megalitres I think was allocated in total, leaving about 780 megalitres in the bucket that was not allocated. Before this allocation was made though, there was about 15,000 megalitres of existing entitlement that had been issued to landholders either under the Water Act previously or under the former Water Resources Act. So that means that currently in the Gilbert River catchment there's about 30,000 megalitres of water that has been allocated for irrigation and other purposes. So that could actually include some of the town water supplies. So the Water Resource Plan will now look at volumes that could be potentially made available and allocated to individuals for irrigation or any other purpose. So what we noted from the FGARA reports was that a number of scenarios were provided. I mentioned the optimal scenarios for the Gilbert River, but the CSIRO were very keen to point out that there were a few things that they hadn't considered. Greg touched on the Northern Gulf fisheries, and of course Northern Gulf fisheries were very strong advocates for the government to look very closely at water allocations in both the Flinders and Gilbert catchments because of the potential impacts that it could have on their business. And by that I mean that their reliance on those flush flows through the system to help with the processes for moving the prawns out into the Gulf, as well as the breeding processes in around the estuaries of the river systems. So that was a very, very important factor that wasn't studied as part of the CSIRO investigations. There were a few other environmental considerations that also needed to be given more thought to. So the department used the information from the CSIRO reports and undertook further research, further investigations into quantifying the potential impact to the prawn fishery. So to determine what their actual flow requirements were and see whether that could actually be sustained with the optimal Figara scenarios that were being proposed, those dam sites. The other important factor in the assessments was looking at whether or not water could be made available without impacting on those existing entitlement holders. So that means those people who have an entitlement to take water from the river systems already are going to be impacted by further take of water from the river systems. Now, Russell mentioned before that we have in the Gilbert catchment very reliable rainfall. The difficulty is that the rainfall all occurs at one particular time of the year, and that's not when people want to irrigate. So that means that the only real option for irrigation and putting irrigation on at the peak demand time for your crops is to store that water for later use. Obviously there's a range of challenges around that. Soil type and land suitability is one, evaporation loss, all those sorts of things are major challenges for those that would like to develop water resources and make use of that water for irrigation. So the things that were looked at were alternatives to those Figara scenarios, the dams, because what we found in the research that was undertaken was that while the dams provided reliability, meaning that you could make releases from those dams later on in the year to provide for water for irrigation at those peak irrigation demand times, it didn't provide those flushes through the system that were required for the prawn fisheries. It actually altered the flow regime in such a way that there was a noticeable impact to the prawn fisheries. So what the department then looked at were alternatives to those dam sites and alternative volumes to the proposals that were offered up as part of those dam sites. Initially, the total volume was around 700,000 megalitres that could potentially be allocated as part of the Figara findings. What we've determined through the assessments done in relation to the prawn fisheries and in relation to maintaining the existing entitlement holders' rights is determined an allocable volume of about 489,000 megalitres for the Gilbert River catchment. So the former government released those draft findings late last year in December. We were out in the catchments talking about those findings in January before the election. And we called for formal submissions to those findings, to the draft water resource plan, and those submissions closed on the 10th of February. Now what we've heard so far from this government is that business as usual, the Minister will be considering those submissions, informing a decision about how to move forward with allocating water in the Gulf catchments. At this stage though, it's slower than the process we had originally planned because the Minister is taking some time to get his head around the issues, look at all of the various pieces of information that have informed the draft water resource plan. Then he'll be making a decision about moving forward with finalising that water resource plan. Once the plan is finalised, that opens the way for an allocation process, how that water could potentially be allocated. Now, I've talked about the fact that we found some challenges associated with those large dam in-stream storages, Green Hills Dam and Dagworth Dam. That doesn't necessarily discount them. The plan doesn't say you cannot build this dam or you cannot build that dam, or IFED can't continue in this space, or Strathmore won't get any water. All it says is that there is this volume of water available, and provided the outcomes of the plan can be maintained, and that means that the water requirements of the fisheries industry and the environment are met, and the existing entitlement holders' rights to take their entitlements are protected, then water can be made available in a number of different ways. So that's where we're at the moment, and hopefully you'll see me again in the near future out in Georgetown and down in the Flinders catchment as well, hopefully promoting the water resource plans and without too many changes to the volumes that we're proposing. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks Shannon, well done. You see those, you blokes up the back, do you see how they stayed on time? That was we're getting better as we go along. So big hand for Greg, Shannon and Will.